Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Chessy Prout, the founder and advisor of I Have the Right To, who will be co-hosting this episode with me. We're sitting down with someone we both deeply admire, and we can't wait to share this conversation with you. Hi, Chessy.
Hi, Katie. I'm so happy to be here with you today, and I'm so excited for our guest, not only because her story and work is so incredibly powerful, but also because she supported me in many ways through my own healing and professional advocacy journey. We are so excited to welcome Leslie Morgan Steiner to the show.
Leslie Morgan Steiner is a New York Times bestselling author, women's empowerment expert, and survivor of domestic violence. A TED Talk speaker with over 10 million views, Leslie has been featured on The Today Show, National Public Radio, and Anderson Cooper 360, among others. Her work has appeared in Newsweek, Business Week, Elle, Parents, Vogue, Vanity Fair, and more. Leslie is the author of 4 books, including Crazy Love, which recounts her personal experience with domestic abuse. At 22, Leslie appeared to have it all: a Harvard diploma, a glamorous job at 17 magazine, a stylish New York City apartment, and a charming, street-smart boyfriend. But behind this facade of success, she hid a dark secret. She had fallen in love with the wrong person. In Crazy Love, Leslie unravels the complex dynamics of domestic violence, the myths surrounding victims and perpetrators, and the psychological traps that can entangle even the most successful individuals. In addition to Crazy Love, Leslie is the author of Mummy Wars, The Baby Chase, and her latest memoir, The Naked Truth. With a career spanning writing, corporate leadership, and media, Leslie is also a passionate advocate for women's rights and serves on the board of I Have the Right To and the National Advisory Council for the Conference on Crimes Against Women. Welcome, Leslie. We're so grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here myself.
So, Leslie, I wanted to get into how we know each other and how we were introduced, which is the way that we've met a lot of supporters and other activists throughout this journey, which was through friends of friends and people who knew that we had similar passions and similar hopes and dreams for the future for people around the world. So I read Leslie's book, Crazy Love, when I was starting and in the middle of my own journey of writing my memoir. And I was so lost. I didn't know what a memoir could look like. And I'd read a couple, as a younger person at school and for fun, but I wasn't well versed in it. And Leslie's book is so beautifully written and so powerfully shared. And I'm just so grateful for the work that you've done, Leslie, not just as a writer, but also as an advocate and survivor as well. For any of the other survivors listening today, do you have a specific message to survivors or people who are going through these sort of hard to deal with things?
Well, I think one of the most important messages is twofold. Which is, first of all, I believe you, and I've been there myself. I think that one of the many very difficult things about being a survivor of sexual assault and or domestic violence is that we victims are blamed quite often by our society. And sometimes we blame ourselves, and we also are, I think, quite intentionally silenced and separated from other survivors. And I couldn't have survived my own trauma without connecting with other women who had also survived, who told me that I would be okay, that I would be more than okay, and that one day this would feel like a nightmare that had happened to somebody else. And that I had to trust myself and believe in myself and move forward. And so that's the biggest advice that I have is trust yourself, believe in yourself and believe yourself. And as much as you possibly can, reach out to other people who you trust, who are going to help you, because this is a very, very difficult experience to get through on your own. And I've experienced incredible healing and comfort from other survivors, and just from other people who listen to my story.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I also want to say thank you for Crazy Love. So I recently finished reading it a few weeks ago. I had it on my shelf for quite a long time, but just couldn't open it up because I also lost a really good friend to partner violence. Her name is Mikey, and she passed when she was 9 months pregnant. She was killed by her fiance, and reading your book was really healing for me in a lot of ways. And it's something that I want to share with her family. So first, I just want to say thank you. It's incredibly impactful and important. And so thank you. And I just wanted to ask you what it was like to write Crazy Love, and just what your hope was in writing it and sharing it with the world.
Well, thank you for those kind words about Crazy Love. It's really gratifying to hear that. And I really love connecting with other survivors and the families and friends of people who survived. It means a tremendous amount to me. So the whole journey to writing Crazy Love, it was long, and it had a lot of twists and turns. The first thing I want to say is that it took me about 5 years after the end of my extremely violent, abusive marriage before I could even talk about it. And I just want to say that because I'm so public now, and I speak all the time really openly about the worst relationship of my life. But I don't want any victim out there to feel like there's something wrong with him or her if you can't speak about it. Because it is such an enormous trauma and betrayal that it takes a long time to even admit the truth to yourself about what happened. And it took me a very long time. Then, 5 years after the abuse had ended, I just started to feel kind of safe enough that I could start to look at myself. And I've always been a writer since I was a little girl, so it was natural that I turned to writing the story to decode it to myself and explain it to myself. And once I started, it took 10 years to write it. It was not an easy book to write. And I cried a lot writing it. I faced a lot of obstacles in writing it. And it was also really hard to get it published, because most publishers said that that readers would be too ashamed to buy it. And fortunately, I had a wonderful editor and publisher in St. Martin's Press who believed in me and who believed in the book, and who insisted that everybody else was wrong. And the day that it was published, it was a New York Times bestseller. And that was incredibly gratifying to me, because I knew that this was an important story to tell. Not because it was my story, but because it's just every woman's story, and people hadn't told it. And also I was really happy that all those other publishers, most of whom were men, were wrong. And I also want to say, and this is something that Chessy and I had talked a lot about from the very beginning, is that part of my motivation in writing Crazy Love and telling my story was anger. I was really appropriately, in emotionally healthy ways, really angry about what had happened to me. About the fact that somebody who I loved and had been devoted to had treated me so poorly. And that in so many cases, that victims of abuse are treated with great disrespect by our criminal justice system and by our society. And, when I was a kind of a secret victim before I had come out and told my story, this happened dozens of times, that I would be somewhere at work or at a party or, a kid's event or something like that. And, from the outside, I look really successful. I have an undergraduate degree from Harvard, an MBA from Wharton. I sort of like all of the tickets are punched on my card of what you're supposed to be as a successful woman in America. And so people would say to me just in passing, how weak and insecure and self-destructive domestic violence victims were. If it ever came up, if there was some celebrity in the news or somebody who we knew or something like that. And it made me so furious that people who I respected and relied on, especially well-educated men, didn't understand, had never thought for 1 second, really 1 second, about what it is like to be the victim of sexual assault and domestic violence, the two most common crimes committed against women by men. And so my motivation in telling my story was to try to get them to understand it. And Crazy Love is a quick read. It's a kind of a seductive read. I think when you pick it up, you can't stop reading it, because I wanted people, men in particular, who knew nothing about abuse and who would never voluntarily learn anything about violence against women. I wanted to surreptitiously educate them. And I've done that with so many readers who didn't know what they were getting into, but who ended up reading the book and really or watching one of my TED Talks and having a much greater understanding of what women go through, really like every single day of our life. What Chessy and I have gone through is incredibly common. I don't know a single woman who hasn't gone through some kind of sexual assault, abusive relationships, sexual harassment at work or on the sidewalk or in her family. And the terrible truth is that most men are completely oblivious to this and they don't even think about it. And as a result, it's really hard to change our world and make our world safer for women and girls. And so I'm really committed to that from a place that admittedly comes from a lot of anger. And I think it's healthy anger. I think it's totally appropriate to be really angry about this.
Definitely. When we go to schools, when we're doing like professional development or parent workshops, we'll often put up a slide and it's like the continuum of sexual violence. And we'll ask people to raise their hand, if they've had that experience. And sort of starts at the bottom end, like with catcalling, and then all the way up to rape, and many things in between. And every hand, when it's a group of women, every hand in the room goes up. And I had mentioned I was doing a training and there were several men in the room. And I had mentioned that the first time I remember being catcalled, I was about 11 years old. And his eyes got so big, like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And I thought, it's not though. Like, I guarantee you every other woman in the room is not surprised by that at all, and how it's just on some level of that continuum, it's just a part of everyday life for women and girls.
Yes, it's exactly true. And I have found I've always had really close and strong relationships with the men in my life, starting with my father and my brother, and then, the scores of guys who I dated. And then I also have a large circle of very close male friends. And they just don't, they sort of go through life without thinking what it's like to be a woman. And a lot of them, the first time that they really start thinking about what it's like to be female is if they have a daughter. Then they see, men are so much closer to their kids than they used to be a generation or two ago. So now they see firsthand what their daughters start to deal with long before they become teenage girls. 10 or 11 is really pretty normal when it starts. Sometimes it starts even before then. And so men are becoming much more involved in this movement, this fight to make the world better for women. But I would really like to accelerate that and get them to listen long before they see it through their own daughter's eyes. Because this is an every person problem. It's not a woman's issue. It's not a girl's issue. It's actually, you could really easily argue that this is a men's issue, because men are the ones who perpetrate most of the violence against women. And men must be involved in this conversation and the solution. And sometimes they're willing and sometimes they're not. And I, as part of my work I have the right to, and also my other advocacy, I speak to teenage boys all the time. And it is one of my all-time favorite audiences. I find that they are incredibly open to learning about this. They want to be better. They want to have healthy relationships with women, friendships and romantic relationships. And as long as I don't come out guns blazing, blaming them, personally blaming them, they're very, very willing to hear about this and to ask questions and to make sure that they don't perpetuate this. And that gives me a tremendous amount of hope.
Yeah, same here. And a lot of them might experience abuse themselves too, right? And they never tell a soul usually. And if they do, it's not until much, much later in life. It's
so true. I think that we forget about that a lot. All of us, everybody in our society, that men and boys in particular are victims of abuse quite a lot, and within their families, within their communities. And then they also can be victims of abuse in relationships, in romantic relationships, sometimes physical abuse, even in heterosexual relationships, but also quite a lot emotional abuse and manipulation. Everybody does unhealthy things in relationships, and everybody experiences it, which again is why this is really a global problem, not a siloed problem that only a few women and girls need to worry about. Everybody needs to worry about this and become educated about it.
Right. And it's always so surprising, too, to see the faces of parents when we do share that statistic where it's, the 1 in 4 girls, but then when we get to 1 in 6 boys will be sexually assaulted before the age of 18 or before they attend college, they are shocked. And I think that's been an incredibly unique viewpoint that I Have the Right To has maintained as something to keep at the heart of all of our presentations and all that we do, is to remember that hurt people, and it's important to meet groups of people and young boys as, human beings who are also capable of being hurt, and that a lot of hurt that people end up perpetrating comes from a place of so much pain and shame that is thrived in isolation. And so creating spaces that are open to talk about what they've been through or experienced, either through conversations, through programs, through reading. Reading is such a cool way to expand your world, your empathy. I talk a lot about Chicken Soup for the preteen soul, teenage soul. I loved reading those books growing up, and I was talking to somebody about it recently and was like, oh man, yeah, I guess they are unfortunately geared toward young girls and instead of kids of all genders. But empathy is such an important lesson that I feel like we get from reading. And it's because of people like you, Leslie, with the way that you made Ugly Love and your work so broadly appealing, and not just, obviously that's barring the subject matter, but showing your whole humanity, not just your identity as a survivor of domestic violence, but showing your identity as showing your strength, showing what you had achieved beforehand, what you were achieving during and after. I think showing your wholeness is something that is first a huge task to lay yourself bare like that, but is also so valuable for survivors to see and for me to see as a survivor, that you can be so many things at once while also experiencing violence or sexual assault. And you are not just your identity as a survivor of these things. And yet there are people who are still in the middle of these sort of situations that they might feel like they will never get out of. And I know that in the depth of my, healing journey, I was wondering, when am I going to feel okay again? When will the world feel safe and okay again? I don't see that happening anytime soon. And, people would say to me, other survivors that I eventually met and found community in, would say, things get better. Believe me, they do. You won't believe me now, but they do. Do you have a message for people who are in the thick of it right now, who might not be able to see that light at the end of the tunnel?
I remember the pain of the immediate aftermath of the final beating. My ex-husband he had guns. Unfortunately, he had been strangled as a kid. He was a victim of abuse himself, and so he was really drawn to strangulation. And he had a black belt in karate, a black sash in kung fu. He was a very, very capable abuser. And so the final beating was horrific. And so there was that physical part of recovering from that. But then also to have to dig deep and say, I need to have the fortitude to end this and to take care of myself. And nothing in my life had prepared me for that. And it was incredibly hard. And I was traumatized and raw. And, I felt like for a very long time, I slept for 12 hours a day and then cried for the other 12. And then I started to feel sort of like numb, like I'm going forward, but I'm very numb. And it took a long time, like it really took a couple of years before I felt anything like myself. And even then, if I saw somebody who walked like my ex-husband or who looked like my ex-husband, or I remember once I was in a corporate development meeting where the man running the meeting like slammed his hand on the desk just to make a point. And it took me weeks to get over him doing that. My stepbrother said to me jokingly, I'm going to kill you if you do that. And he was really joking. And I had to say to him, look, you can never, ever say that to me again, because it's really been said to me. And I believed it. So there's lots of trauma to get over. And it does take a long time. But I will say that the thing that helped me the most was that from the very beginning, it was clear to me that it wasn't my fault, and that I had just fallen in love and trusted the wrong person, which anybody could do, and that my ex was the one with the really big problem, and that what I needed to do to heal was I needed to learn how to trust myself in a very new way. I didn't need to learn to trust men again. I knew that wasn't really a problem. I knew it wasn't that I needed to necessarily be more protective of myself. It's that I needed to listen to myself and trust myself, that it was an inside job, the healing. And I think that that's something that's really important for anybody going through this to know, that you've got to focus on yourself. And I think it's important for parents. There's a lot for parents to understand here that is really difficult. And Chessy, you touched on it earlier about when the bafflement in parents' eyes when you speak to them. And I think this is part of our mission as well at I Have the Right To, is to make sure that parents understand how common sexual assault is and how common abusive relationships are, both for their sons and their daughters, no matter their sexual or gender identity. It's something that their chances are very good it's going to affect everybody's kids at some point. And it doesn't matter what your religious beliefs are, what your education is, what neighborhood you live in, how close you are as a family, whether you're married or divorced, it doesn't matter. This gets everybody. And there's a really eye-opening movie called The Hunting Ground it's the story of a wonderful organization called End Rape on Campus and how that was developed. But it's basically interviews with dozens and dozens of survivors of sexual assault. And I'll never forget one of them saying that even harder than surviving the assault itself was when she told her parents that she had been sexually assaulted. And I think that's important for parents to understand how hard it is for us to come forward. And it was so hard for me to tell my parents for many, many, many reasons. But a lot because I didn't want to hurt them. I love my parents and I wanted to protect them. And I thought they were going to blame themselves. And I was really fortunate that my mother in particular could not have handled it better. She never blamed me. She never said, I told you so, even though she had really, really tried to caution me against this relationship. And she supported me in every way possible. And there is nothing like a mom who does that, who believes in you and who can support you, and a dad. My dad was much more conflicted. He had grown up in an abusive home himself and he really didn't know what to make of all of this. And sometimes we expect too much from our families. They don't know anything about sexual assault or abuse, and they don't know how to talk victim language. But they can learn, and it's one of the things that I think is really important about all of our presentations is getting parents on a more comfortable footing with the fact that this is common. It's not going to destroy the family or them or their child, and that secrecy and shame are actually much more destructive than actually honest talk about the subject.
That's incredibly important and helpful. So for the parents listening, I'm a parent myself. I have a 3-year-old and a now 8-year-old after this past weekend. So anything you would say to parents about, obviously my kids are still young, but as they get older, and for the parents of teens that are listening, any red flags that you think that they should look out for, or just things that they should be doing now to encourage conversations so that hopefully their kids will tell them if something's going on, any actionable steps for parents who are thinking about this and wanting to help their kids navigate dating and finding healthy relationships.
Well, the first thing I would say is don't wait for the red flags. Because if you're waiting for the red flags, of which I can talk about the many red flags, but don't wait for that, because it's a lot easier to talk to kids when they're younger about anything that's difficult. You know, Katie, you said your kids are 3 and 8. By the time my kids were 3 and 8, I had already talked to them about being in an abusive relationship. The facts are pretty simple that 15 million kids are victims of violence every year in the United States, according to the Center for Disease Control. And the number is probably a lot higher than 15 million because it's such an underreported crime. So the chances are that your kids have either witnessed something or have friends who've been abused or know something about it. And even at those very young ages where we think, oh, we want to protect our kids. But the mistake that I and so many other parents make is that we think protecting them means not talking about it. And the opposite is true. You protect your kids by talking to them about bullying and abuse and sex and sexual abuse. And you don't have to go into a lot of detail. You know, I was very brief with my kids. I told my kids, you know, Mommy was married to somebody before Daddy. He used to hit me. You can't stay with anybody who hurts you. And so I had to divorce him. And that's all I said at the beginning. And then the kids asked questions later, and they read what I'd written, and they listened to my TED Talk because I was practicing at home when they were little. I mean, they've heard my TED Talk 100 times. My kids could give a great talk about domestic violence. They know so much about domestic violence and sexual assault because I talked to them about it when they were young. So that's the main thing I would say is don't make this a secret. Talk about it. And our culture gives you lots of excuses to talk about it. You don't have to talk about your own experience or their experience. You can just watch TV together or listen to songs on the radio, look in the newspaper or magazines, listen to podcasts. And I mean, it comes up so much. And I'd say don't shy away from the opportunity to talk about it, even if you feel really awkward doing so. I mean, I felt so awkward and it was so hard to talk about it, but I did and I needed to. And I also would add to that, this is an especially important message for men. There are very few dads who think it's part of their job description as a father to talk to their kids about violence against women and sexual assault and being a victim. It just never occurs to them. And it's really important, men. Men listening, you got to talk to your kids about this. Because this can't be something that's like a pink collar ghetto where it's just moms and just girlfriends and just wives and just daughters talking about it. That sidelines it. And we've got to, again, I've said this before, but we got to bring men into this. And so I always ask dads, you know, have you talked to your sons about what rape is? Have you talked to them about the fact that men are raped too? Have you talked to them about emotional abuse and power and control? And I have yet to find a man who has done that on his own. And it's really important that men find a way to speak about this as well and make sure it's not a shameful subject for anybody to talk to them about.
Yeah, that's so important. And, you know, even with little ones, I find that the conversations can even start when you're walking down the toy aisle. Like, there are so many violent toys geared towards our children, and I have a rule that we can't have toys that look like real guns in our house. And my son was like, well, why? And, you know, I sat down and I said, because, you know, mommy's good friend died because somebody had a gun that shouldn't have a gun, and it's not a toy, and it's something that's serious. And my husband, who used to be law enforcement, sat down with him as well, and we had this conversation with him, and not to scare him, but to educate him and to open up that dialogue. Because I think you're exactly right. If you wait too long, the silence for all those years help add to the stigma of, oh, you know, my parents waited until I was 16 to talk about this because this is something we don't talk about. But that's so important.
Right. I agree as well. And also, I think when you talk to your kids at an early age, they become kind of like very young activists in a way that's so healthy. Because if you think about it, if there's like an 8-year-old kid who is being abused at home, or a 10-year-old who's being abused at church, or somebody who's being hurt by a coach, the chances of them coming to any of the three of us is really slim. They're going to go first and foremost to a friend, somebody their age. And you want the friend to be like a first responder and to believe them. And it happened to all of my kids that multiple friends on multiple different occasions came to them and said, my dad hits me, or my girlfriend is doing this, etc. And instead of my kids saying, oh, but your dad seems like such a nice guy, or your girlfriend's so pretty, how could she hurt you? They know to believe them, and they've said it to their friends many times. I know what you're talking about, and I believe you, and if you want help, I can find people for you to talk to. And that's hugely, hugely important in ending this and making kids of any age feel safe disclosing what's going on with them.
Yeah, I think it's so important to remember that kids, and also, obviously I'm not a parent, I do have a dog, but that does not count, I've been told. No, but kids, I remember being a kid, and I was so curious, like from birth onwards, we're so curious about the things that we see, the things that we read, and now with, technology and social media and the news being so accessible and also unavoidable to anybody who has access to a screen, we're seeing things at a much younger age that we have questions about. And, I like to say that the burden of knowing that these things happen and the burden of knowing how to respond to bad things, because a lot of adults will say, well, I don't want my kid knowing that abuse happens, or they're too young to talk about rape or sexual assault. The second we are in our human forms, we are susceptible to violence. And therefore, I don't think there is an age too young to talk about what's good, what's bad, what's okay, how does this feel? Do you have a question about anything? Because I think the burden of knowing that these things happen and the burden, a quote unquote burden of being prepared is much, much, much less than having to go through it and being so confused and not knowing what's going on and not knowing that what happened to you is not your fault so explicitly. And, my parents were really open with us when we were younger about, reproductive health, and we read all those books, the American Girl doll books about knowing your body and what puberty looks like. And yet I still was so unsure of what to call what had just happened to me. All I could say was that somebody had sex with me and I didn't want it. I had no idea that was sexual assault or that was rape. And so I'm wondering, Leslie, what do you think parents or educators can do or say to help teach kids and instill in them these tools to have and create healthy relationships?
I think it's that just talking about it is the most important thing. Talking about it kind of in an everyday casual way that doesn't make too big a deal about it, but just presents it as an open subject. And I think there are a couple of things that are particularly important and difficult for parents to say. One is to let their kids know that if anything like that ever does happen to them, that I won't judge you for it and I'm not going to blame you for it. Because I think what we sometimes assume, or maybe sometimes we even promise as educators, is that the payoff here to parents is that it's not going to happen to your kid. And we all know we can't promise that. And there are a lot of parents of victims who will say, I didn't raise a victim. There's no way she could be a victim. There's no way she could be an abused spouse. There's no way that she could be a rape victim because I didn't raise my daughter to be that way. And it just makes you as a victim feel so awful. So I have said to all of my kids, if anything does happen to you, even though I'm an advocate and even though I've talked to you so much about this, I will understand and I will help you. So the promise isn't that we're going to prevent anybody's kids from being hurt or victimized. And also we all know that the predators are so good at this that there's no way we can think of every script and every kind of combination to diffuse the seduction that sometimes happens in these cases. But we can help our kids recover faster and without shame, and connect them to resources and other survivors. And so that's a message I think that's important for parents to know too. It's a hard message for parents to even wrap their heads around. That you're there not to prevent anything bad from ever happening to your kid, but to help your kid discover their own inner strength to get through it.
Right. My parents had a really helpful no questions asked, and it wasn't really that because, I knew that they would have questions no matter what, but a no judgment rule where if you ever feel like you're in danger, and a lot of this, was implemented when we moved to the United States. So when I was around 12 years old, and they would say, if anything's wrong, if anything feels wrong, we will not punish, no punishment, no timeouts, no groundings, no anything, no questions asked in that sense. Call us, let us know, and we will be there to help you. And so that's what I try to tell, any parents that I come into contact with, is to have that be explicitly said to your children, to hope that you've built the relationship strong enough for them to come back to you when they need it.
Yeah, I try to do that same thing with my kids. I always say, I'm always on your team. I'm always going to be on your team. No matter what, I'm on your team. There's nothing you can do ever that will make me not be on your team. I just so badly want them to know, like, if something happens to you or somebody that you care about, like, come talk to me. We'll figure it out together. And I think kids need to know that. Just know that they have people in their corner.
And we need to hear it too often, frequently and often. I think it's easy to forget when life gets in the way. So these things, it helps to hear it.
I also think, Katie, that what you said about, talking to your kids openly about what happened to your friend is really important. And even if we don't have a tragedy that close to us, almost all of us can talk about something that had happened. And I know my own mother had a very hard time talking about anything that involved relationships or female sexuality. And it made it so much harder for me when I faced my own problems, because she was my role model. And I feel like if she had come to me and said, I'm sure she had lots of examples of things that boys and men had done and how she handled it. If she had talked to me about that, I feel like I would have recognized much more quickly what it was that has happened to me. And in addition to my own abusive first marriage, I had, just like any woman and girl, I had a lot of things happen before that point that I wish I could have talked to my own parents about. But because they had never said anything, we didn't have a language for it. We didn't have a way to bridge that gap. And it made it easier to stay in denial about the things that did happen to me.
That was something that I wanted to ask. So for young people, you talk about in your book, in Crazy Love, you talk about the relationship and how perfect it was. And then there were those changes, right? Those subtle changes that started happening. And then it spiraled into like those abusive patterns. But what can we tell young people? We've talked about maybe what we can tell parents and educators, but young people who are dating, they're navigating this new dating world that's in person and online. And I don't envy them because that's harder, I think, than what it was when I was younger. But what are those subtle shifts and behaviors that they should pay attention to, or things that they should be looking out for in their own relationships?
So it's just so hard because abusive relationships start off so similarly to healthy relationships. They're in disguise. And, love, especially, well, any time actually, but I think the first time that you feel like you're in love or you're loved is so intoxicating that it's pretty hard to say to somebody, ooh, if it feels too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Like, there's nobody who's going to believe me if I say that, but that's the main message. Like, if it feels like a fairy tale, be afraid. It also goes against everything that everybody has heard since they, were little kids. So it's hard to have some credibility. But what I try to do as a parent and as a friend and even in my, talking to myself about the relationships that I am in, is to call out uncomfortable behavior when it happens. The volatility, the possessiveness, and to just say, like, that's not normal and that's not okay. And I try two things. One is that I try to say, to put it back on the person I'm talking to, like, how does that make you feel? But then I also want to hold up a mirror and say, that doesn't feel good to me, and I love you, and something in you has changed, and I don't like that. I don't like that you now have to get your partner's permission before you have lunch with me, or before you call me, or that you have to post a picture of us together to prove that you're with that person. It's a very tricky thing to do, to call it out in a way that doesn't push the victim away, and doesn't tip off the abuser to the fact that you're watching for this, but to let the person know that you are watching and that you see this, and this doesn't seem to be quite normal. And I have to tell you that people tried to do this with me when I was in the early, fairy tale stage of my abusive relationship. People who I cared a lot and trusted tried to intervene and say, this is moving too fast. It's too strong. He's coming on too strong. He's love bombing you. And I was already gone in the relationship. And I remember feeling so sorry for them. These people who were trying to warn me, I felt so sorry for them, that they had never experienced this kind of true love. But those were also the people who I went back to when I needed help. So sometimes when you plant a seed that you see what's happening and that you're a safe person to go to, it might not be a year or two or more until the person comes back to you, but you still have set yourself up as a safe person to turn to, and to never give up, and to never get angry at the victim, and to be very, very patient. This is very tricky stuff that we're dealing with. Recovery, becoming aware that you have been violated one way or the other, or continually being violated, and to support victims and survivors. It is not easy, and we need to continually educate ourselves in addition to educating others about how best to help people who are going through this real time in our lives.
Yeah, it's hard because you want to have that balance, right? You want to have the balance between being there, but not having them pull away from you, or also not have the abuser see what you're doing and then, put walls up around that relationship as well.
That's something that I've been thinking a lot about recently too. Mel Robbins had an interesting comment about how to confront a friend who you might not agree with what they're doing. And she mentioned something about the ABCs of like being able to say something at one point, but not pushing them away. So you apologize for being on them, and then you back off, but you're still in their lives. And then at the end, if they come around and realize and then do for themselves, what you might have been trying to get them to do from the beginning, you compliment them versus tell them, I told you so. Obviously it's much more complicated than that. But I think that those three things are super important for me to hear as a friend, as a sister, to, you can make things known. And I think it is so integral to plant a seed. Otherwise, people can go through their life like the emperor with no clothes. But then remembering to back off, I guess, is, an important takeaway from you as well. And then knowing that you can come back to those people that you planted that seed at the beginning, I think is hopeful for people who are maybe looking at their friends or peers or sisters or brothers right now and saying, God, how do I wake them up to their reality? And the truth is we don't live in their reality. We don't know their reality. It's their reality. And, all you can do is really love and support the people that you love in so many different things, not just, when it comes to abuse or violence, but in job decisions, in life changes, in lifestyle. It's all about, loving and supporting the people that we want to see succeed, which is, it's a nice way to translate the responses to extremity to, smaller moments in our lives as well. Because I feel like a lot of people listening might say, well, I don't know anybody or nobody's told me yet that they're going through something like this. Nobody's, shared with me this. But there are still ways to build that empathy and sympathy with the people in your circle, even when they're not going through things that might seem like end of the world. And I did want to ask, you're talking about all of this so eloquently and beautifully, and you mentioned earlier that, although you reflected 5 years after and then took, a couple of years after that to write your story, I get so many comments and questions from survivors and just people who want to share their own life experiences. As somebody, who has also written a memoir, but I wish I had more time. And sometimes I want to go back and write a more reflective version of my story because, we were writing on such a quick deadline, and it was such a wonderful and amazing experience. But I have had so much time to reflect on, what's happened since that I would love to go back and rewrite. But so many people ask, how do you get pen on paper? How do you start sharing your story, from the creative side of things, but also the business side of things? How do you get your story heard and created?
Yes, and I have advice, but it's so rarely the advice that people really want to hear because it's simple, but it's just not easy. So the way that you write your story is that you sit down and you write your story. And you just write every day or every week or however works for you. There's no substitute. You just start doing it. And the thing that helped me a lot was just to write and not reread what I'd written, but to just get raw copy down. And when I had 100 pages of crazy love, then I went back and I was like, okay, I do have something here. But I didn't do it before then because I just needed to get it out, And then in terms of how do you tell your story, again, it's really simple, is that you just tell your story. And you can start with your family, your friends. You can write a letter to the editor. If there's there's always something in the news about some kind of sexual assault or violence against women. You can, make your opinion be known in a personal way. You can use social media to tell your story. You just have to keep on, go on and telling it. And there's no, there's no magic path to finishing a book and getting a book published. It's pretty clunky and, just go forward and do it and do it and do it. And then if it's meant to be, the path will materialize. But your job, if you want to tell your story, and not everybody wants to, and I really respect that. Not everybody, some people are so private and they need all of their energy to just take care of themselves. But if you're one of those people who wants to be open about it, then I just talk about it all the time. I talk about it all the time. I don't care if, I've never been in a setting where people didn't actually truly want to connect on a really deep level. And I don't care if it's like a taxi driver or a person sitting on the plane next to me or a formal dinner party or something, a kid's picnic. People, they want to talk about what's really going on in their lives. And if you go first, you'll be amazed at how many people listen and also the stories that you get back in return. And that kind of connection is incredibly gratifying and healing in and of itself. It's really exhilarating to me to connect with people on such a deep level. I highly recommend it. But it takes a little bit of courage to take the first step.
You give people the permission to be vulnerable with you by you being vulnerable with them. I think that's such a good reminder. Even just doing this work, when people say, oh, what do you do for a living? And I share this, I can't tell you the amount of people who have then disclosed to me, like in a cab, at the airport, at a restaurant, parents of my friends' kids, or it's really family members, friends. Whenever you share this and you let it be sort of part of the conversation, and you're vulnerable and you're real, it allows other people to be vulnerable and real, and that's beautiful. So this goes back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago. with my friend, I often think back and I think, what could I have done differently? What could I have said differently? What are the things that I should have realized, especially doing this work? I think, how did I not see it whenever I work with survivors? And then when I was reading your book, the different people that sort of stood out to me was your one friend, that you eventually told, and even the coworker of your your previous husband's coworker who sort of pulled you aside and said, "Are you okay?" Are there any things that you think that were very helpful that people did for you? I think what Chessy shared, the ABCs of sort of giving them space, is important. But anything else you would share, Leslie, for those who are seeing a loved one go through it and they're just like desperate to help them, but also don't want to lose them?
The first thing I would say is to believe your own instincts, because if you think there is something wrong in the relationship and your friend or coworker or relative, their personality has changed since they've been in the relationship, if you suspect that something is wrong behind closed doors, most times your instincts are right. And so I would listen to that. It's an unfortunate but natural knee-jerk reaction for us to discount ourselves and say, oh, it can't really be that bad. If you think something is going on, usually it is. So I'd say trust yourself and then find just a very gentle way to talk to the person about it. As I wrote about in Crazy Love, those two friends confronted me very kind of quietly. They didn't say, you are an abused wife and I need to rescue you and we need to call the police and he's a monster. There was no drama around it. They just looked me full in the face and said, are you okay? I care about you. Something's changed. I want to help you. I'm here. I need you to know that I'm here. That's all they said. And I have said that kind of thing to many people over the years, and you just say that and then you wait for them to come when they are ready. Because you can't rescue anybody. It's a very dangerous thing to do for yourself and for them, and you need to be patient and wait for the opening. But what you can do at any point is just say, hey, I care about you and I need to know that you're safe. And also just remember that denial is such a big part of this, that it's really normal for victims to pretend that everything is fine. And I think it's important to respect that that's their coping mechanism. And to not blame them for doing that, to just be really patient and loving, and understand that this is disclosing that something terrible has happened, especially if it's been at the hand of somebody who they care about, can take a really long time. And to not get frustrated, and to show them love in whatever ways you can, because as a victim, that's what I needed so much. I needed people who didn't judge me, who didn't get frustrated with me, even if they didn't understand what I was going through, who just still loved me and believed me. I really could feel that and believe that even when I was isolated by my abuser, and it meant the world to me that I had people on the outside who still believed in me.
That's beautiful. That's super helpful. Just being there and being a presence that they know is there when they're ready.
And that sort of feeling of broader belief, I feel like I've definitely felt a shift in the last 10 years. 12 years now. Oh my gosh. And I do think, a lot of that is due to the, Me Too movement that gained popularity in 2017, and that's really all people sharing their stories and telling other people that they're not alone in what they've experienced. Despite all of this outpouring of, people sharing their stories and people speaking out about sexual violence, I even noticed some of my peers from school who wouldn't support me during my assault. We're walking in the Women's March, we're holding posters, and when all of this is happening, when society is seeming to take a shift, there's still so much work to do. We're not we're not getting rid of the root of the problem. And I think people are still really struggling to talk about this interpersonally. It's so easy to repost something on your Instagram story, but when you're noticing something, or maybe even refusing to notice something that's happening in your life, how do you think that we can morph that energy, reframe that energy from all of these public displays to also translating that into our private lives? What are some actionable steps that you think would be helpful for people to hear, to really get to the root of our societal issue?
Oh, that's a big question.
It is, yeah.
I think everybody looks at this question differently, and I happily admit that there are bigger minds on this than mine. But the way that I see it is that we are tackling an enormous societal problem that has been entrenched for millennium. That whatever may be understandable, but also maybe very, very confusing and nefarious reasons, some men are interested in dominating women. And it's like this huge iceberg, and all I've got is my ice pick. But I'm still going to stab the iceberg again and again. I'm just chipping away by telling my story, by supporting survivors in any way that I can, by posting on social media, by encouraging people to stand up for women, to listen to women. When I've had corporate jobs, by being a very enthusiastic promoter of other women in the workplace, by raising strong daughters and sons. I mean, there are a lot of relatively small things that I can do, that we can all do with our ice picks to chip away at this problem. And I think that that's a glorious thing. I'm doing what I can, and I see so many other people doing what they can. And, I have made huge mistakes in my life. When I look back, I'm horrified. I think of kind of like how I reacted to Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton, and how much as a young feminist myself, I blamed her. And I think to have a little bit of grace and say, okay, more will be revealed, and hopefully good and smart people will learn more, and they will discover their own ice picks and join us. Something that is true too is that I don't want to be consumed by this work. I can only do what I can do. And I have the right to live a great life that has, pleasure and daydreaming and hobbies and sleeping in sometimes and vacation. I cannot be an advocate 24/7. I would burn out. And also it's just not what I'm called to do. And so I try to be realistic in what I expect of myself, and to just trust that it's good enough what I'm doing. And that it is such a huge problem that I'm not going to solve it in my lifetime. But I am going to do what I can do. I am doing that, and can feel really good about that, as can both of you and everybody listening. Just by listening to this, you're doing something, because you're opening your mind and you're learning. And then if you can take one more step and talk about what you listened to today on this podcast, get somebody else to listen to it in your life, then you're actually doing something pretty huge.
I had such a beautiful image in my head when you were saying that, Leslie, like of this huge iceberg, and there's you and there's Chessy, and you guys are just like going at it with these ice picks. But honestly, I think you girls have axes. Like, let's be real, right? So you're there with those axes, but you also have a bag on your side, and you're asking other people to join you. And that's what each of you have done. With your books, with all the work that you're doing, you're not there alone. You're having this community join you, and you're giving other people those ice picks, and you're giving them that strength to go at the iceberg too. And I think that that's the thing we have to remember, is that we have to have community. We have to bring each other into this, and we have to attack it together, because none of us are going to solve this problem alone. It's not a one-person problem, one person solution. It's going to take a long time, and we all have to go at it from different angles. And so I got the best visual when you were saying that. And you said, Leslie, that you have the right to have this beautiful life. And you are right. Every survivor has that right. Every person has that right to have a beautiful life. So before we end, I want to ask, what does that look like for you, right? As somebody who went through something truly awful, and here you are now living this life. What does healthy love look like for you? What does a happy life look like for you? And what can the aftermath lead to?
So, when I was in the process of ending my abusive relationship and taking the early steps to recover from that, I made a vow to myself, which was that I would never let anybody abuse me again. And that I would never stay in an abusive relationship again. And I have kept that vow over and over and over again in lots of different relationships, sizes and shapes. And unfortunately, there are people in our families, there are people who seem like really wonderful partners at first. You might discover they're not over time. There are bosses, there are companies. Like there are a lot of abusive relationships sort of hiding in plain sight. And I have kept the vow that whenever I saw that it was abusive, whatever the details were, I got out of it. So I'm really happy today. I have an incredibly rich and full life with myself at the center of it. And I am good to other people, to strangers and to people who I care for, but more than anything, I'm good to myself. And that's not a message that a lot of women get growing up, that it is really important to take care of yourself. And I don't mean by like going to a spa once a year. It's not something like that. It's like every single day I live the life that I want to live. And I'm the only one who can decide what that is. And I just take care of myself. And I think that one thing that we don't talk enough about in this conversation writ large is how important economic independence is for women and girls. My life would not be possible if I hadn't invested so much in my own education and in my own career as a woman. And there are many times it wasn't easy. There were many times where people said that I was working too hard, or I was too type A, or like too ambitious, or God, whatever they said, and they were all wrong. I wouldn't have the life that I have, and I wouldn't have been able to leave my first husband or any other relationships if I didn't have my own economic independence. And that's very important, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's something to be really proud of. And I encourage everybody listening to make sure that you're investing enough in yourself, because you never know when you're going to need it. And it is a really nice life to live, where you get to make your own choices about where you live and how you spend your time, and who you share your bed with, and who you do everything with. Freedom is fantastic. It is a priceless commodity. And in part it comes from your own psychological strength, but also the truth is it comes often from economic independence as well.
That's amazing to hear. And something that I love getting older every year now, because not just because I'm further and further away from who I was at the point of trauma, but also because of the freedom that I've grown to have. And not just, the freedom of living on my own, but the freedom to do what I want and not what I should. And that's been a huge life lesson that I'm grateful for. My older sister calls them the crow's feet by my eyes. I call them smile lines, but no, I'm so grateful for each and every day. And, watching your journey, Leslie, through your books, and then also through just watching your life on social media, I think gives a lot of people a lot of hope that things do get better, that you can continue on and grow and become who you want to be in the face of violence. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story. And it is such an honor to have you on the podcast today.
Right back at you, Chessy. It's really great to be here. And Katie, thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you to everybody for listening, and for just opening your minds to understanding this problem better.
Thank you, Leslie. And before we end the episode, can you let our listeners know where they can hear more from you, where they can find your books, where they can follow what you've been up to?
So my books are widely available if you just look under Leslie Morgan Steiner. Also, my website is lesliebooks.com, and that's my social media tag as well. And there's lots of information on my website, and also my email is on my website, and it's my real email that I check. It's not an assistant. It's just me. And so if you want to continue this conversation in private, I do that all the time, and I love connecting with complete strangers and sharing our stories. It's really a wonderful part of this work. So come to lesliebooks.com.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please remember there is help available. Check the resources in our show notes for more information. Until next time, stay safe and take care of each other. Make sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to the podcast.